Is it okay if we talk just a little bit about kind of your beliefs, just in a kind of broad sense?
Yeah.
And I'll ask just a few questions. So, what does God mean to you?
Yeah. Well, God is the name I give to the deep love, the deep energy, the life force that I've tapped into sometimes. And so to me, God is, you can call it whatever you want. I'm less certain about human bodies and all that stuff than I used to, but I'm certainly open to it. Some of you may have caught this even about a month ago. I wondered about that out loud on a podcast when we had Thomas Ord, who's a non-Mormon, to come in, and he was saying, embodied God just doesn't make sense to me. And I said, well, am I hurting myself to actually think about an embodied God? Am I somehow or other, I'm projecting, God's way down the road, but I'm kind of projecting myself forward, and it seems like a good idea. But at some point, am I losing this deeper connection with the mystical awarenesses and things that I've gotten? And so many of you know I'm part of the Living School. I'm in my first 7 months or so of that. And it's a wisdom school. It's a Christian contemplation school. And I'm reading lots of Richard Rohr. I'm lots of the mystics from, the famous mystics, and a lot of Rumi, various things like that. And we're, just something about that. It's just got me really alive right now. So God, whatever you want to name God is fine with me, but I have experienced things that are not created by my head, that are not created from just my body or whatever. There have been moments where I've been completely not in charge. And they've swelled my heart, they've expanded my vision, and they are just, these touchstones for me of a reality. And then through practice, through various disciplines, whatnot, through the years, I've kind of gained, a baseline of that song or that energy, kind of through most of my day. I'm an idiot, and I, talk myself into all sorts of daily problem type things, but there's just something that's backlights everything that makes it feel significant, the choices we make and stuff. So that's God for me.
Love it.
And whatever God is, it's got a female and a male, characteristics to it. Phil, in his mystical teachings, talks about most of the mystic things are feminine, receiving, yielding, things like that. And those kinds of things are that. But I haven't been able to be as hard and fast on divine couple stuff.
What does Jesus mean to you?
I'll tell you, it's been an explosion lately. One of Richard Rohr's good lines is, Christ is not Jesus' last name. So Jesus is an individual person that walked on the planet, Palestine, whenever, we mark time, mark our calendars from that person. And Christ is... Honestly, this is just in the last 9 months. I've just gained such an appreciation for D&C Section 88, that very beginning stuff, the light of Christ that is in and all, through, and it proceeds forth. That's brilliant, because it isn't Jesus. I was reading it like, from Jesus Christ, this is all in and through everything and all that stuff. So Christ is the incarnation of God in all the universe for me now. It's just far more this... life force that's everything, the thing that drives everything to be its fullest expression. And I love the Mormon, that everything can have joy in the measure of its creation. That is mystical insight. That is really cool stuff. So Jesus, to me, is just someone who was perfectly aligned with that. He called it the kingdom of God, kingdom mentality, the kingdom that was supposed to, may it come to earth the way it is there. 100% egalitarian, 100%, non-gendered, based and things like this. It was elimination of the poor. It was honoring the subjectivity of everybody and everything. And this guy, whether he was a premortal, somebody or not, he came to embody Christ, the incarnation of the divine in such a way that I'm just learning millions of more things. Just how radical he was. There wasn't a single thing that he wasn't trying to overthrow, in terms of the mentalities, the purity laws, the whole, even like his hard sayings about who's my family, what do you mean my mother, my brother? You here, you're my family. He's trying to get people to quit feeling the domination of the family expectations. Anything that would pull you out of the vision or experiencing the kingdom of God sort of within yourself, that's where he's coming from. And so I actually want to talk a lot more about that kind of stuff coming up. So that's the plan.
What about the Holy Ghost or the Spirit? What does that mean to you?
Just that aspect of that lets us all feel interconnected with each other. So whether it's a personage of the Spirit and we're terrible in Mormonism on that. There's, we think we can, do the little, how can it be in one place at one time and yet feel everywhere? To me, it just names the connectivity between everything. That's why, it's almost like love, in some ways, the love between everything that exists and us that we can kind of feel, what could be communicated, to us. So we kind of have God as God the Father is more the plan. Then you have the incarnation, and then you've got the thing that pulls it all together. So that's where I'm at now. But it's mystical, and you can't talk about it well. But
what does the role of prophet mean to you?
Well, it doesn't mean president of the church. Is that okay? And anyone needing to leave? They're separate things to me. Wasn't it around David O. McKay when they started to really call the president of the church the prophet? In fact, Brigham Young totally rejected it. The prophet was Joseph. I'm the president. And that was the mode. And now we have such a big church and the prophets and the apostles, which are basically CEOs and, super vice presidents over all the various aspects and all those kinds of things, get called the prophet, and yet prophecy and that spirit of prophecy is, comes from fresh insights. It should be looking at the social ills and, all that. I don't, to me, I'm not saying that they're not prophets because, again, I feel like they've got some fire that comes from God or their own, they're trying to put themselves in a discernment place. And then they give their talks and they make their things based upon that. But I would never limit the word prophet to our guys.
So some of your favorite prophets would be who?
Jody's dad. Jody England over here, Gene England, who, I love, Hugh Nibley spoke from it, Chaco, all sorts of voices there. Certainly Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, Dag Hammarskjöld, or I don't know quite how to say that, but, just these people that clearly, in many ways, Richard Rohr, because they're just offering a fundamental critique while still loving, that's what a prophet should have. It should be able to say, we are missing the boat here, and yet there should be never any doubt that they're trying to be constructive, that this insight is, for, I don't know, I wasn't expecting this question, but that would be it. They can see stuff and say stuff, and it's never supposed to be part of the institution, right? All the prophets were outside of the royalty, outside of the divine lines. And so I would prefer reserving it for that, but I'm not getting that wish.
What is Scripture to you?
Yeah. People's best. I mean, I believe that the Scripture writers had inspiration. They're telling the stories that were meaningful to them, but they have their own personality and their own blind spots and their own, beautiful things about them. And whatever level of spiritual development they're at, I believe they're sharing from an authentic spiritual place for that. Now, as I look at the Old Testament and whatnot, I'm seeing real tribal spirituality, there. I'm seeing a lot of militaristic things and whatnot. And, those are early stages of human development and faith development or something like that. And so I don't feel trapped by them, just like, oh, God really is this angry, jealous, that. So when I get to the New Testament and you start reading about Jesus and you start saying, oh, I think God's a lot more like this guy. And so I'm grateful for the Scriptures, and I'll tell you, there's Margaret Shoscano and I, we always get together and talk about this. Our Scriptures are right up there with the ones from the other traditions. I promise you. Our Mormon ones are not in any kind of secondary status. Every single work of Scripture has human hands all over it. You can just see them. And they're very, they're just speaking a different language. And so like for me, the Book of Mormon, what is it, I don't know how many pages apart. You see something that's clearly 19th century, Joseph's part of the process, And then you get King Benjamin out of there, and there's just things in there that, still to this day will catch my breath, And so I just, certain sections of the DNC and even just parts of the DNC, I love, Book of Abraham's well problematic. Mark and I were talking about it at dinner earlier. But there's some hunches in there. I don't care if they came from scrolls, They're part of my life, and I get insight from them. And I do want to teach, I learned this new way of reading Scripture called Lectio Divina that I want to share in the future with everybody, because it's the most powerful way to read Scripture, I think, that I've ever discovered.
That's a teaser.
Yeah.
What does the church mean to you? What's the role of the church?
You're talking the institutional church. Because scripturally...
Okay, talk about both.
Well, the church scripturally is anybody who's what? Trying to follow God, trying to do goodness. There's only two churches. There's this and that. And then Moroni 7, if it's leading you to good, it's from me. If it's leading you the other way, I'm not a Satan believer, everybody. Is that okay? Hope that doesn't throw at you. That just names something, in us. But, so I believe in the church as the community of saints, the community of people striving for God. Then we have the institutional church, which...
What's its role?
Well, to hold a discussion together, to say these are the Scriptures, these are the themes, these are, directions that we want to go. Let's try to get more people to grow. And they offer programs and whatnot, but they build the buildings, they keep the lights on, they provide the temples. But all of that should be seen as for us, and not us to break ourselves over that. You know what I mean? It's like the Sabbath was made for us, not us for the Sabbath. The church is made for us, and for us, it should serve and lift and help us all. But when we feel it being draconian and, demanding this of us and demanding of that, that's when we need to do some inner work and figure out our boundaries, figure out what our our relationship should be to it. But I'm grateful for it, And, with priesthood, I really separate power from authority. And I always just consider the authority part to be, it's an organizational thing. You get to run this. You get to decide what happens in a meeting. You get to decide this or that. So the keys
Kind of order.
Yeah, just like that. Where the priesthood is power, man. Everybody's got that. Everyone has their access to it if we'll just give ourselves permission. But a lot of us, oh no, that's overstepping it, and we're afraid. We're afraid of all that God wants to give us. I mean, it's a feast. It's abundance. And we're like going, oh, I'm not sure that's proper. And that's sad. I hate that.
You mean men and women when you say that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sure. And more women are claiming it. And I'm all for that. That's the power. The rest is, I'm authorized to write you a ticket as a cop. Yeah. That's all.
How have you made peace with Joseph Smith and Brigham Young?
Different guys.
Two of the most strong personalities,
Yeah.
let's say.
Yeah. Joseph is a mystic. His hunches, that's honestly what I love about Mormonism. This uncreated business, this everything's eternal, everything's capable of enlargement. It leads into that whole, everything joy in the measure of their creation. Everything should be considered its own end in itself, all that kind of stuff. We're really strong on that because we're not believing that God created it out of nothing. We're believing in a universe that came together through God's attraction. The attractiveness of this to grow into a new order, to find more fulfillment and stuff like that. So Joseph Smith in all those areas is wonderful. But like every other, person, he's way wrong on some things, And, it's like everyone kind of knows about Martin Luther King and some of his stuff. I tell you, read Erik Erikson's book on Gandhi. Gandhi's Truth. And right in the middle of it, he just goes, I'm going to stop, and I need to write a letter to Gandhi himself. And he writes about, dude, some of your weird stuff about testing your strength of character by having nude women sleep with you, that ain't good. And he just feels like talking to the great soul, that way. And so with Joseph and some of the things like that, I'm just not... I'm not down with, and I was one of the main final editor on Carol Lynn Pearson's Ghost of Eternal Polygamy, and I just love her sort of take. Don't say that he didn't love people. Don't say that his heart wasn't in the right place. But I'm looking forward to having good talks with him later, and he'll admit to me that was a wrong move. And I hate the consequences of that. So I like that. Now, Brigham Young, I think the church wouldn't be here today without Brigham Young and sort of that authoritarian, autocratic, buck stops here kind of guy. And, certainly, the ends justified the means. And if it was more efficient for me to treat you like a jerk, I don't like that part of him. I tend to believe, like Gene England did again, that, his own personal wealth and stuff, there was at least a part of that was probably to protect the assets of the church by not having them subject to being confiscated or whatnot. So I at least give him those kinds of things. And I really think he wanted to, I love his stuff about a regional self-sufficient economy. Spend your money here, grow this economy. We can't be doing that. If you want to smoke and have cigars, grow the tobacco here. You want to make your own wine, those kinds of things. I really think he was the one that we needed to do this. But of course, people voted with their feet against some of his crazy stuff, right? His Adam God. Well, I'm not going to say crazy because I've actually seen the Adam God presented in a lovely way that, there's some ennobling things about that I want to honor. But blood atonement, it's like you can teach it 10 times from the pulpit. How long did it last? It really didn't stick. So, again, I think that's the way we should deal with things today, too. It's just like, have your own mind. when it comes to what a particular person teaches.
For those who want to, take some of Joseph's teachings, like the Matters Eternal, or any of his teachings, and then tie them to specific sources of inspiration, books that he would have had available to him, other people he would have known. How do you make sense of or reconcile the fact that Joseph may have, brought to us an inspiring vision, but most of the source material likely came as him acting as cultural sponge of people and texts that were around him.
Sure.
What credit does he get in your mind for that?
Well, what credit do any of us get? We have our own autobiographies. Everything that we've learned, at what point in our life we learned it, who did we meet and somebody else didn't meet that were influential on us. But also, no matter what, we're co-creating anything that is inspired. I'm putting it into a form that I draw on all my resources. I'm writing a book right now, and I'm drawing on, there's so many things I can't name where I got them. I kind of have a thing planned for the acknowledgments to that fact. I'm going to credit Mike here, though, for one thing. One of his tips was always say what you mean, what you believe, but don't always be saying it. But yeah, always tell your truth, but don't always be telling it. So things like that, I can name Mike on that. But just my own sponginess, my own history, at what time I did it is the same. So a lot of you've probably heard me, but I guess for the folks who haven't, the volcano analogy really works for me. It's from Father David Stendel-Rost, who's a monk in Belgium. I think he's about 95 years old right now. But he's not the only one that talks about it, but a new religion begins by a new eruption of God into the universe, right? So let's imagine a volcano just churning in the universe. But it comes at a very specific time, in a very specific place, and it's experienced by a person with very specific contours to their mind, including all their autobiography. When we see the volcano lava, start to, the eruption is no longer happening. We see it take shapes as it goes down the side of the mountain, right? And those shapes are, again, the culture, the expectations. People were wondering about the Indian mounds, right? They were wondering about where the origins of the Indians were. There was all these different things in the air that was there. And so that's part of this. And you had Joseph's own personality. We had his family's interest for a long time in that there had to be a restoration of early Christianity, and certainly he and his family weren't from the only group that was thinking of that and stuff. So all these things are in Joseph Smith's mind, but I really believe that, boom, something powerful came in, and it took shape for that, in a very particular way, because of him and because of time and circumstance and culture and all sorts of stuff. So then, the lava, begins to cool a little bit more, right? You can still see the glow instead of the pure orange. And eventually, you end up with igneous rock. You get these lava fields. And how many people would look at a lava field today and go, man, everything there was created in fire. You have to kind of really think through your earth science, right, to get to that. And yet, so what we end up doing too often in Mormonism and in our own lives and stuff, any spiritual experiences we have, we interact with it so far downstream that it's hard to see the fire that was ever in it. And so some of the things that happen in the Mormon church and some of the cultural expectations and all those things, there's something burning in there. Like I said, I couldn't find that for the mall. So I didn't go it. But there's usually something in there that you can kind of say, okay, I can see why that worked. I can see why it worked in the 19th century, and it doesn't work so well today. But, we got these echoes in here, and I can live with that and try to, explain it that way as an echo. But for the most part, I just don't worry about there being a human being with things in there any more than I'd be paralyzed and I would never even dare, give talks in public or do a podcast, So does that work for
great.
the answer? Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So let's shift gears a tiny bit and talk about your ministry.
I'm just looking at the time, man.
Do you have to go somewhere?
No, I
Do you have an appointment?
Well,
Do you have an appointment?
Okay. All right.
This is for history.
For history. Wow.
So Dan, when I'm looking for a cheap, easy way to describe you and what you do in your audience, and I don't mean it in like a bad way, a pejorative.
The
Progressive
elevator speech.
Progressive Mormonism, liberal Mormonism. How do you self-describe your brand or type of Mormonism and what you espouse and kind of who your audience is, or do you?
Well, you had kind of posed it to me you called it middle way Mormonism. And I did do a show in my first year on that, using that term. I have never liked any of those qualifiers. So I try to be a Mormon, let others figure out what I am. You know what I mean? That's what, it's like Mormon was, I used to seriously during especially those years when I couldn't get a job. I would want them to know, yeah, I'm a Mormon, but I think Tom Green's a crazy dude too, because that was who was going on. He was our famous polygamist back then, or I would be a Mormon. I'm a Mormon, yeah, but I'm a cool Mormon. I'm a liberal one, I'm a Democrat, all those kinds of different things. And that just used to be really important to me. It's not important at all anymore. And I don't like those because it's too easy for others to categorize you and go. So I would love just to avoid it. So what you see now in my podcast, I'll say something like, sort of in the circles, or I'll say the community that sort of listens to this podcast. I'll just group the people who are, Mormon Matters listeners by people that want to talk at this. So in this sort of space, that's what it is for me now. So I don't know that I have a ministry to anybody other than people. I got this term just last fall, recognition energy. And it was in the context of let's think about reading the New Testament from the perspective of those who followed Jesus with no idea about the resurrection, nothing about atonement or whatever. What was it they recognized in him that drew them to him? And I'm not saying that for me, but there's recognition energy that's at play in lots of things. And so there's just a certain level, a certain type of people that something in my approach is, they recognize it as something that's important for them, maybe just now at one stage of their long journey or whatever. But that's, I'm not a real promoter. And I don't ask for enough money, right, Lori, at the end of each podcast. More donations. But, I'm just grateful, And again, I've gravitated towards certain teachers and certain people and stuff like that in my life. And that's all I try. Again, I don't really have a big marketing plan, who am I trying to reach?
But you would acknowledge there is such a thing as, let's just say, orthodox Mormonism. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's hard to use any labels. Labels always fail.
Yeah.
I was interviewing a Jehovah's Witness last week or the week before, and I kept using the term, Orthodox Jehovah's Witness and then something else. And he stopped me and he said, there's no such thing as the term Orthodox Jehovah's Witness.
Because everybody believes the same thing.
He says there's Jehovah's Witnesses, and then there's people who are no longer Jehovah's Witnesses. Mm-hmm. And I was like, and this is a guy who hasn't spoken to his father in 5 years because he's shunned, and his father hasn't met his own children, right? So we're not that, right? That's not. And maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, maybe we were more like that. I don't know. Or maybe 50 years ago, we were actually less orthodox in some ways than we are now. I know it's complicated, but there is something. There is Mormon orthodoxy, and it's important to say that because there is alternatives. And I think you've helped carve out that space. And so, let's just talk about that for a second. Somebody comes to you and says, "I stumbled on the essays. I stumbled on CES letter. My kid's gay. I'm a woman and I want to have a career." Whatever it is, they come to you, and they come to you, really on that edge of saying, "Do I want to be a part of this community anymore?" How do you talk to them?
Listen a lot, I hope. Hope I don't start spouting too early. Identify.
How do you make the pitch for staying engaged?
Oh, well, I don't know that that's the right choice for them. Again, from 1989 to 2000 was sort of my time, about 3 or 4 years, Lori, that I wasn't very active. I had to go away because I was just too upset. And so part of that time I got quite involved with the First Unitarian Church on 13th East below the U, because I wanted something, spiritual, but something to chew on or whatnot. And then for a while I made a couple of friends in my ward, and I wanted to go see them more than worrying about what was going to be taught or whatever. And so church was about going to see them, and I'd go in the morning to hear Tom Goldsmith, the pastor, and I'd, go to my ward in the afternoon. And so I don't know that anyone, just like every relationship, you shouldn't have an end in mind. This is the only acceptable end, right? It's not a real relationship like that. And so I would say everyone's journey, there's no real place for it. But I do have studied a lot of Campbell and faith, faith curves of, the directions that people go. It's usually out, and it doesn't have to be physically out. But what happens when you slay the dragons, you defeat this fear. All the different things that you're doing in this hero's journey, this one thing is you're accomplishing, something. Something has died, a fear, a sense of I'm not good enough or whatever. And as you're out and you're in your journey, one by one, old views are dying and new ones are emerging. And
kind of like the lava.
I'm not sure. I'm not saying that's about it. You probably are just thinking about some. Let me just quickly say. But the hero doesn't really know if they've internalized this until what? Till they go back to their own community, and can I interact? Can I become the master of both worlds? I know this inner journey. I've had all these experiences, and can I be back in my community to offer the gifts that I have gained from my journey, and then give them. And so I don't know if anybody know Carolyn Pearson wrote her book about the hero's journey for gay and lesbian Latter-day Saints, and if they're capable, and if they choose to, she says you could be the most powerful teachers of Mormonism, but I don't know that it would be healthy. I think if our son Alex or our daughter Hope would have gotten to a, if either one of them were gay, and it hurt them to have me be in the church, like, Dad, what goes on there, I would have stayed out, to honor that. I think both of them would have realized I'm fighting for him within, right? But on the other hand, you can't predict it. So what is my pitch to them? It's just like, man, take your time. You took a long time becoming Mormon. If you're going to become un-Mormon, take a long time. Don't leave a cardboard version of it. There's this whole, what is it? we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are, right? You're going to find whatever you're looking for. If you're looking for closed-mindedness, you're going to find it. If you're looking for good, pure hearts, you're going to find them. And so I would just hope that everybody wrestles and gets into a position. My good friend Rick Jepson, I know, is listening. He taught me the greatest metaphor ever. It's just like, it was at Sunstone during a thing, and then I ended up publishing this article on God wrestling. It's the metaphor of what is a wrestler? Somebody who is fighting. I want to take Richard Tenney here down, and I'm putting myself against you, and you're putting yourself against me. But as we're fighting, we're also hugging, right? We're embracing. And I think that's the ultimate metaphor for a faith journey when it comes to a community, when it comes to God, when it comes to, the messages. When you get your messages from your parents, and you get their version of Mormonism long before your cortexes and all that stuff are working out there. They just come in at this very, subtle level of a child. And so the wrestle with that should be to differentiate your ideas, and you decide what Mormonism is, and hopefully it's bigger or different than what your parents internalized, or at least that you picked up along the way as your major things. And so wrestling while hugging, that to me that's what it is, But again, get away from the pain. If you're getting punched in the face every week, take your time out, Do what you need to do to get your equilibrium again. And then you go in for the fight another day.
So if somebody says, so the Rubicons that I've crossed are, I can't go back to a traditional view of deity. I can't deal with the literalness of it. I can't deal with the exclusivity of it, historicity of it. I don't support the ways that it harms people. So they say to you, if I've crossed the Rubicon on all those different areas, what's the value proposition? What are some of the things you offer to people about the value proposition? If they come to you saying, what's the value proposition of staying in the wrestle? I can go wrestle elsewhere, and I'm not saying you.
But will you?
Okay, so talk about that. So talk about that.
I don't know. A lot of. I mean, I really think that our first, fight or flight, right? That's natural, and of course, again, I didn't want the responsibility of growing up, so I was fleeing from it, and I fled into some really dark directions, but ultimately, you've got to make peace with it, right? This is one of the things that, your whole life, hopefully, part of your wrestle is every piece of everything that ever happened to you. And so, I've honestly, listening to Michelle Obama's book on the big long drive to Albuquerque and back, I'm just bawling in this early section of it, because I hear her parents, wonderful, brilliant, in their own way, just kept, the ceiling was pretty low. But man, the values that they taught and this and that in the to them. And so she and Craig both end up at Princeton and, successful and amazing people and all that. But I'm just bawling because I had to make some peace with my family, which was quite a bit more chaotic. There weren't rules. I could get by on BS instead of really doing my homework, because again, I have a good memory. I don't need to study it because I can recall it to be the performer, when I needed. So you realize that, I have to make peace with my upbringing. And I love my mom, I love my dad. They gave me so many gifts, but they didn't give me discipline. And so that was just a thing that I had to do. I've had to make peace with, various difficult, shadow work, whatever you'd want to call it. And so, I think the church for anybody else is going to end up having to be something that they wrestle with and make peace with, and don't stay in the stance of, the victim to it. Get the power back. by somehow saying nobody intentionally tried to screw you up. You got to get to that sort of point and where you can enter into their lives and their hearts and sort of imagine what the world was like for them. And,
So I've heard you talk about making peace with it, and I've heard you talk about it providing you with a moral structure. What else?
Friendships, relationships, practicing, what I think I know in terms of, being loving and accepting of others and, seeing them, with love first. So just the community is important. I think we, if we're in any echo chamber, right, and our mind certainly can be an echo chamber, we need to test our ideas out on other people. We need to have pushback. You and I, we are like great friends, but it's because we push and we're the loving each other because we fight with each other kind of guys. And so I'm always grateful when I throw my crap out at you and you throw it back, and I do the same for you. So that's what I hope. Everybody has that. So church does that for me. It offers rituals. It teaches a Sabbath, teaches a chance to reflect. It builds things into your week, and whatnot that at least give you a chance to call something good, something other than your normal crap and stress. So what else does it give me? I don't know. I found my wife, made babies through the church, and I loved my mission. My mission was transformative and amazing. So,
and the soul work. What's the opportunity for spirituality and soul work there beyond community and service?
Oh, soul work within the church?
Yeah. What does the church have to offer beyond ritual, beyond a chance to serve, beyond community?
Well, again, it's teachings about the soul. Very optimistic. None of you are junk. None of you are a mistake. You are beloved. You have divine core. If you don't feel in your divine core, it's because you've gotten a cloud, it's blocking it from you. You're lost in your own mind, your own fears, your own struggles, this kinds of stuff. And so the church has these wonderful, optimistic teachings and a very beautiful view of humans and potentiality and all that stuff. Now, again, some of that gets lost in got to follow the commandment instead of realizing that a commandment is not because God's going to be mad at you if you don't do it. The consequence of some of these things is simply going to be you're going to have less life. You're going to have less, chance for joy and happiness if you get caught up in, some of these other things. It's just going to be the natural consequence. So I'm almost more of a karmic view of that. There's no punishment. There's no God is pushing buttons and, you get it, you don't. Kurt doesn't get it, very often. But so looking at my friend here. But our church really kind of has that wonderful thing. So when God created everything, and when it ends up into the God wants to be worshipped rather than be in communion, if we'll just let ourselves, we're already at one. The atonement, Phil does great language on this. It's just rediscovering our own at one-ment with God and let Christ's life, let his teachings, let him move you in such a way that you're inspired to trust and to surrender to being more. Instead of like, I want to hold on to what I am, so I'm not going to allow myself to grow. And I think that's the big change that has to happen in people. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm looking at him for approval. Does that make sense? Okay. Oh, thanks.
As you, so I imagine that this work can be difficult. Let's talk a little bit about, I can't say that you and I have had the same emotional landscape. But I can tell you that this work can be very difficult. Trying to be a voice in this space, trying to make a difference, trying to be a constructive voice. And then there's so many different ways that this work can be discouraging, even soul-crushing. And I know that you have dealt with depression here and there. There's probably something to be said about depression separate from any of this work. And then there might also be something to say about how this work has an interplay with that depression. Are you comfortable talking about that at all?
Well, I'm certainly happy to talk about my own depression. I'm type 2 bipolar, so I have fairly normal cycles of feeling really high, full of lots of energies and ideas, and then I don't get to the point where I can't get out of bed. So it never gets so dark and it never gets so high that I call up people at 3 a.m. and say, I've got a revelation to share with you and you need to know it right now. So that was an inheritance in my family that runs through my family. And I've been a lot more open about it. I finally decided to start taking meds only about 10 years ago. I would just write them out, And so yeah, I get low energy. I notice it a lot in I can't focus on many things at once. I can usually have 5 or 6, kind of projects that I can, nurture. I might be just the emails today is all I can manage, or just this or just that, and I can rise to the occasion for a little bit. So there's that. But for me, I haven't really seen it that tied to what happens in Mormonism or what you're calling the soul-crushing nature of sometimes the work. And again, that's because, honestly, it's the blessing of rock bottom. I got to meet something smarter than me, something, I was making a mess of it, and I had to admit to something else. And so there was this energy that I tapped into, this courage, this, just this support. And so I worry when people feel it's so soul crushing and I'm burning out on this and I'm not seeing change, it's because they want the energy to come from the change. They want to see the results instead of do you feel like you're doing what you're supposed to do? Are you in alignment with your values? As what you feel in the vertical, matching, what you're putting out into the world in the horizontal. And so that, to me, is the renewable energy source. The one about, I gave it 2 years, they're not marrying, LGBT people aren't, marrying in the temple. I'm out of here. I'm being extreme there. So I hope that's what I'm saying is your energy has to come from here. And hopefully people can let themselves experience this. And especially smart people like all of us in this room. It's hard. It's hard because all of our acclaim, all of the things that we're known for, the things that stroke our egos and stuff is what we can do here. And for one way or another, I just say start working some disciplines. Meditation, mindfulness, prayer, and again, prayer, I think I mentioned it recent podcast, at a certain point, we ask thee, we thank thee, I'm good, will you give to me? That's supposed to be gone, and prayer simply changes as you develop a different relationship to where it can be perhaps more of this friend to friend, yeah, that sucked. I'm still weak here. I know you love me. Let's, some of my stuff that, I really feel is okay, let's get working on this. You've been dragging your heels. I've been serving it up to you. It's finally time to deal with it. It's finally time to write this book that you've been putting off for 3 years, that kind of stuff. So
3 years?
Well, I've had it in mind for about 3 to 4 years, yeah. But
I've wanted you to write a book for 10 years or more.
Sure. Yeah. But honest, I'll let you guys know something. I've kind of been a podcaster and an editor and a ghostwriter and stuff like that. I feel like, so I've been a podcaster with this other stuff. I think I'm going to be a writer who has a podcast now. So I've got some books in me. So if some of you will buy it, I'll write it either way. I'll write it because I'm compelled to write it. But yeah, I think I'm starting to get the hint and acting on the hint that I should write. So
beautiful, and I'm super excited for that. So as in the same breath, we're going to say the middle way is an inadequate term, or progressive or liberal Mormons is an inadequate term. And you're going to say, I just like the term Mormon. And in 2019, that word has become forbidden officially, which makes
that's right.
it kind of ironic.
I can't figure out how to get around it.
So let's just put aside all that complexity for a second. As an observer of you and as someone who for many years was, and in some ways still is, an advocate for a middle way or a progressive Mormonism or a bigger Mormonism or an enlightened Mormonism, whatever it is, I sometimes think of myself as keeping score. So it's sort of like, CES letter, Tanner's, pick whatever podcast you want that's viewed as anti-Mormon, available to sort of pull people out. And then and of course that's from Orthodox Mormonism. And then there's sort of, your work, or maybe Gino Colvin's work up until a certain point, and maybe still, and maybe Thomas McConkie, or the Givens or the Bushmans, sort of, or the Flumans or the Masons or the Maxwell Institute, trying to fight for a bigger, better, brighter, more enlarged Mormonism, right? And sometimes I think about like, whoa, what's the score? And I think probably the biggest question that I get is, and this is mostly from the post-Mormon perspective, they all want, it's a reflection of them. Is there a massive defection? Is the church hemorrhaging? That is the number one question I get. And, obviously post-Mormon, so many of them want, either they're angry at the church and they want to see it torn down, or they have chosen a certain path and they want to feel validated by knowing that there's a huge groundswell that the arc of history is bending towards their decision. Who knows what the motive is, but that's a question that everybody wants to ask me all the time. And then I watch, I get to see the stats of a Thoughtful Faith podcast. I get to see the stats of Mormon Matters. I get to see the donations, right? And I get to see, how the interest waxes or wanes over time. And there are times where I feel like, man, it seems like there's an argument to be made that, man, it seems like CES letter's winning. It seems like post-Mormonism and ex-Mormonism is winning. And that's not just a Mormon thing. If you look at the broader cultural influences of the rise of the nuns and secularism in the Western world, you could say that religion's on the ropes and Mormonism's on the ropes, right? So on the one hand, you could say, and Jeremy Reynolds, forgive me, but CES letter 10, progressive Mormonism 2, you know what I mean? You could say that, but then you could also flip and say, look at all these changes Russell M. Nelson's making in 2019-18. Like the stuff that was being called on for decades before you and I came on the scene, and that certainly for the past 14 years we've been calling for, whether it's more service-oriented missions, whether it's a better place for women, whether it's better understanding of the LGBT experience, less racism, more transparency around the history, a more open space for diversity, a more tolerance for questioning and doubt. You could say, holy smokes, like progressive, liberal, middle way Mormonism 10, it's gotten to the point where Fair and Farms and the Maxwell Institute are kind of like on the ropes because so much of what they used to do, now the church has absorbed and is doing institutionally. And all these changes Russell and Nelson seems to be making make it easier to be Mormon. I mean, if you could draw one string across all the changes, maybe two strings. One is that it's stuff that the internet has been screaming for and clamoring for over the past 14 years. And two is it all helps make Mormonism a little bit gentler, a little bit kinder, a little bit easier to be a member. So what's the score?
That was quite a long question. Well, this
I gotta get one of those.
So at least this was something that he put in the little list about what we talk about.
Finally, we talked about something.
So I mean,
you'll have to remind me what was on that list,
because it was like tips and whatnot, and so it's fine. I've probably covered most of, in some form or another, some of the things. Yeah. So this one I'm a little bit ready for, and a lot of people who know me well, I've been trying out of various iterations of what I see happening right now. I really like the end of Jana Reese's book. So the one about the next Mormons. Anybody, that last paragraph, which way it'll go is, to be seen. Will it embrace this, or will it, become smaller and more and tighter and more this or the other thing? So what I've begun to notice, and again, just from my background reading, through the years, I took a philosophy of science class, and I read Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which is, things don't grow by accretion. Certainly science advances this way, but all of a sudden you have to have a complete paradigm shift, has to happen. And what was the old paradigm has to be honored, because look at all the good science you did out of it. You asked these types of questions of the world and you got these results. Hallelujah. But, enough things start to fail, enough things start to not, what you couldn't predict with the success that you could beforehand. And so eventually a new group comes along and says, at least in this area, let's just go from Einstein. Well, let's at least go to quantum. Einstein still holds force in the, astrophysics, gravity, the fields, space and time, relativity, all that stuff. But it couldn't handle what you're finding in the quantum world. So quantum came along and it's learned to coexist with this. But because there was all these failures of experiments that were supposed to, give the other results. So I think what's happening in Mormonism is we are right now in a huge moment where one paradigm is coming to a close.
Which is, name that paradigm for lack of...
Correlation.
Okay.
Something like that where, we say, here's the parameters, of what could go on in churches and things like this, and everything's under Salt Lake control. And you get a lot of the, believe us. It's us against the world. Will you believe us, or will you believe the world? And this is a decision in your life. And I think that's fading. But really what has to happen is you've got to have a new paradigm that's giving you better results before you'll ever leave something, right? Right? So I think when you say this middle space is starting to rise, and you could say it has the 10 points versus the other one, I think there are more and more people who are finding themselves grounded in their own experience with God. They trust themselves, They certainly honor and respect leaders and teachers, and they try to, teach within the basic parameter of the lesson, right? Pick at least a couple of good paragraphs, right? You focus on it, then you do your thing. There's more and more people that are doing that, and I think this stuff is becoming less scary, We're less frightful to people of, they seem to be still moral. They still seem to be showing up at the ward projects. They're a beloved member of our community. I can see that they have a testimony in the way that they share it and stuff. So I think we're at this moment where the old one is sort of showing its weaknesses. It's running it out, but we're waiting for the new one to kind of say it's okay. But the thing about us who, let's just say that we're working a little bit more over here, we have got to appreciate it. We've got to honor it. We don't have to honor every little piece of it, but we honor it for its role in our lives, the step-by-step, the programs. Here's people who are older and wiser than me, and I let them do the deciding for what I should think for a while, and just have to honor it. But then you can show that you can do more in this other way. There's more blessings, there's more richness out here. But the thing about, like with the scientific things that we have to remember is you invest your life, let's say scientific. I've invested my life with this theory. I've done my experimentations in this. I've gotten funding, for my laboratories. I've risen to the top of my field. I'm the head of. I get to choose who gets to get into the good journals or not. Because you've invested in this. It's very hard for you to want to welcome the new, right? You're going to hold on, and you're going to try to get the youth, and you're going to try to get everybody to be in this one, rather than what this vague thing over here is. And so, but I have to honor that as a normal human desire. I mean, at some point, you just have to say, they're not trying to be evil. They're not trying to close everything down. They are simply doing what they know and what worked for them. You know what I mean? So we have to remember to think about paradigms not only as, a set of teachings, but it's almost like, what are the questions to ask? Instead of like only thinking about the Holy Ghost and teaching of it as its role is to confirm the truth to you of basically what you already know, let's ask different questions about what the Spirit does. What's the Spirit as leading you into new territories, or it's leading you to do your soul work, stuff like that. We need to honor that. So a new paradigm where people share vulnerably and authentically, and we're seeing more and more stories of that, on the internet. Wow, I did something in Relief Society that scared me to death. I started a conversation by saying, I don't know what I think anymore on this one. Or, I'm really struggling with XYZ, and then having the entire room completely, love that conversation. So that's the paradigm I think we're going to. The questions of being, what does it mean to really sustain and support and to be a community are the ones that I think are going to grow versus the truth claims, We believe this, and this in a hard way, And we started having faith, or we think that belief in these things is what it means to be a Mormon instead of being real with each other in community. So does that make it?
So you're saying we're going to move towards vulnerability and authenticity?
I hope so.
As the energy, as the paradigm shift.
Yeah, well, yeah, but again, who knows when it'll be a tipping point to where it's a real thing that other people go, wow, that was the best Relief Society class we ever had. That Sunday school class, I want to learn more about the actual New Testament instead of just looking for scriptures that proves, what I already think about Jesus and his message or whatever. So it's just going to have to emerge. So I don't know which way it'll go. Like Janice says, I don't know which way it'll go, but to me, it's a hopeful thing because it gives me something to do. It gives all of us something to do, something if that's what we feel called to embody a spirituality that's grounded in something more than truth claims, something more than beliefs, but some sort of real, felt connection with whatever it is that's the widest and most powerful creative force in the universe. So does that make some sense? Am I like this paradigm is? I think it's happening. I think we're watching. I bet we'll see it in a couple of weeks in conference. We'll see certain guys, guys and many women, we hope, who will be sharing in some ways from one or the other. And the ones that are all propping up the way it's been, they're just doing what they know best. And other ones are, some of them talk to you like you're a real person, and stuff. Well, you know what I mean? I mean, again, I don't blame them for how they speak in conference because they know where the center of the church is, the center of gravity, is people that, want answers. And we're the kind of people that go, give me better questions. I want to go exploring, right? I mean, that's almost what we're after. And they feel like they have to deliver answers. And I want to move into a church that says, as I gave this talk and as I prepared it, man, I got into some interesting material that sort of blew my mind. Can I share it with you? I'd love that to be almost, it'll never be that casual, but I would love that to be the case. But, us interneters, we pick out one or two lines, just like we take a person and we look at the worst thing they ever did, and that defines that person. We'll look at these one or two lines that just triggered us or made us, feel uncomfortable, and that's it's the worst talk in the world, So we got to get off this roller coaster of emotions over, was this progressive or not? That's at least where I think we have to be. So, and this is getting too long, right? I see a lot of people here.
We're ready to wrap up.
Because I want to talk to you guys.
Does the question of whether the church grows, stagnates, or shrinks, does that even matter to you?
I gave up. This is a Richard Bushman thing. I gave up on the church is the stone cut from the mountain without hands. It's a bad reading of Daniel anyway. But this idea that it's supposed to fill the whole earth, to whether it's, he used the term like a saving remnant. All it needs to be is to be here on the earth and contribute its truths. I love Krista Tippett. She talks about how every religion seems to pick up something that is definitely in the Christian or the, whatever in the world, whether you go Eastern or Western, and they seem to love it. They say, this is our thing. And you have to have a bunch of people giving that thing its most full expression. So whatever Mormonism is, whether it is the idea of eternal progression, that would be my point. That would be my favorite. We work with it, we love it, we teach about it, and so we contribute to that truth being more manifest in the world. So if it takes all of us, the whole world knowing our message, I'm agnostic on it. As long as we're doing it, it's available. But again, you and I have argued about what missionaries are doing. So for those of you who don't know, we've been on shows together. We had one where we were just basically interviewing each other, and it turned into us arguing with each other. Some of you would write, "I'm a Dan Mormon," others, "I'm a John Mormon," and stuff like that. But we.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah, right. It is. It's just like you're calling this thing a celebration to me. I don't like it. But
I like that better.
But the thing was, when I really thought about my mission, I don't know how many people were converted to Joseph Smith and the truths of the gospel. Most people were just they felt something missing in their life, and we showed up at the right time. They wanted to step up their spirituality game, and who's to argue with that? So I'm also for keeping the missionary work there, but I don't need them to, because, the beliefs of the church aren't as important as the community of the church to me. And here's a community that can support you and love you, and hopefully you've got enough of your own thing to not worry about. We took an investigator to a fast and testimony, which was always like roulette, and we had the crazy Uncle Albert kind of person do their thing, and we're just like And afterwards we said something. She goes, because every church has people like that. She was just down to earth about it. We just need to own every part of ourselves, and we're struggling and we're bumbling, and I don't know if I'm done or not.
I love it. So I want to move on to some exciting announcements before we take some questions and comments. But what did I ask you to prepare to talk about that we didn't cover?
Just like various tips.
I don't want to just have that go in the trash can. So anything that you've prepared that you want to just kind of put on the record.
There's a couple things here that I didn't do. So I'll just give you there. I just had 6.
So there's a 6 what?
This 6, if you're going to be in this space within Mormonism, these would be good things to have, to, at least in my opinion, these would be among the most important things. Try to connect with something larger than what your brain can do, what you can think, what your own will can manage. So whatever, again, you want to call it, God, life, the Tao, Elan Vital, whatever it would be, connect with that and directly experience it is number 2. So have some kind of practice. Some kind of practice that puts you in the now instead of, what I got going today and the dramas of this, or you constantly thinking and redoing conversations there. Just get something to where you can be open to this power. Now, it won't always be great, in that moment, but if you connect with something, steady and beautiful and whatnot every day, you're going to be great. So you just need at least 20 to 30 minutes of something like that. Again, beware of the lenses we're wearing. We see what we're looking for. Don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. So then you got to examine, am I leading with love? Am I granting goodwill to other people? Am I trying to enter imaginatively into their lives and the stories of them? Lori and I have had some really interesting experiences with ward members that kind of rub us the wrong way, but then we'll get to know something about their circumstances. Their parents will come to bless a baby, and then they'll be dominating, either up on the stand or in priesthood meeting or relief society. You go, oh, okay, I can see where they got that. Honestly, I could cut them a lot more slack now than just because they drove me crazy. So things along those lines. Mark and I just were talking before we came here. Here we are. We're living our life with our full insides, the full, who we are in this great, stuff, and yet we're only judging people by what they say, what they do. We just have to be able to be willing to enter into their life. So I've got a little section in the book where I haven't quite fully articulated yet in my writing, but with 2 questions, you can get people's what makes them tick, and once you get to know what makes them tick, then you can love them. So, this is a big Gene England one. Be accountable for our part of conflicts. Be accountable for our part of feeling like we're outside the community. So Jody shared on the podcast. We did a series about her dad. We also did a series on Nibley that I thought were both really good ones. But Gene, whenever he needed to talk to somebody that he felt bad energy coming from, or they weren't getting along, and maybe this guy shut him down, or vice versa. She said he would fast at least one day, trying to figure out his part in this. Use the example of the apostles. Is it I? Am I the one that's possibly betraying you? To really be honest and look at that. That's an important thing for us. And so are we working toward a solution, or are we just loving the idea that nobody gets us? Nobody else is in my tree. It must be high or low, right? We kind of like that, We always examine our motives. That's more for like how you participate in class. And remember that you cannot think your way out of a faith crisis. If it's a faith crisis, you got to start involving the elements of faith, which are not things that you can say for certain, but it's a relationship of trust, a trust in this deeper sense of things that also tells you how important and big you are, how capable you are. So those were some of the things I had there. So
I love it.